That's good.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Umber Zaidi, and I am the admin for ISGH Job Networking. We are a nonprofit committee that works for you. In addition to resume and interview preparation skills, we offer many classes throughout the year so you can build and improve upon skills and make yourself more marketable in the workforce, inshallah. We try to assist everybody, so our classes range from GED, ESL, basic computer skills, to more technical classes like Python, SQL, and more. Please scan the QR code that you see on the screen, or you can visit our website at isgh.org/networking to learn more about our programs. Now, to get started with today, we are really excited about today's program as we have partnered with CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We have Mr. William White with us, who is the Director of Operations for CAIR Houston. And he is going to also introduce our speaker, Mr. John Floyd, a board certified defense lawyer. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Go ahead and share your screen if you'd like, please.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Welcome everyone, and thank you all so much for joining. My name is William White. I'm the Director of Operations at the Council on American Islamic Relations Houston chapter. Or if you, like me, get winded in saying that, you can say CAIR Houston. Alhamdulillah. CAIR is a civil rights organization. We are the largest Muslim civil rights organization here in the United States. CAIR Houston is, alhamdulillah, a chapter of that. Our mission is to enhance the understanding of Islam, protect civil rights, promote justice, and empower American Muslims in whatever they may be pursuing. In understanding our mission, I just want to let you all know of our work. So we do a number of things in the community. First and foremost, we are a civil rights organization. Most recently, we worked on the Texas BDS case, which applies directly to your rights as an employee. We've also worked on TSA and wrongful interrogation cases, unwarranted FBI interrogations, the watch list, travel ban, immigration delays, and employment discrimination, which is why we're here today. We also promote justice through a number of other well-known causes, Black Lives Matter, protecting the community against domestic terror threats and white nationalism, as well as advocating for all of the foreign affairs matters that Muslims care about: Kashmir, Palestine, Burma, Syria, Nigeria, Rohingya, Uyghurs, all to name a few. We also, of course, empower the American Muslim community. We have voter rights advocate forums. We encourage Muslims to get registered to vote as well. We increase civic engagement by having voter registration drives and so on and so on. So alhamdulillah, we do a lot of work in the community. And just to make you all aware of what we do, just a quick history of CAIR. CAIR was founded in 1994, fighting against the discrimination and bigotry that the Muslim community faced in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing. During the last administration, we worked on opposing the Muslim ban, as well as other discriminatory executive orders and laws that came down. We have welcomed the new administration's rescind of the Muslim ban and are working to counter its effects in the long term. And we've been increasing our advocacy since September 11th, 2001, in the aftermath of discrimination, profiling, harassment, and all the things that the Muslim community and broader South Asian, Middle Eastern, North African community faced. So we've been working in these areas for a long time. So just so that you all are aware of what I mean when I say what are civil rights, well, civil rights are what your rights are as determined by the Constitution and the Supreme Court of the United States. So our rights, quite simply, are freedom of speech, freedom to the right to protest, freedom to associate with any religion that we choose, and equality in each of those measures. So how are your civil rights protected here in the United States? That is first and foremost through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, which I mentioned earlier, as well as federal and state laws such as the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1967 Voting Rights Act, and the 1965 Immigration Rights Act. So all of these are Supreme Court decisions as well. They are very well determined legal doctrine here in the United States. So just to name a few. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about your rights as an employee and your rights as however you may identify on the job, but particularly pertaining to the Muslim community or any religious community for that matter, what your rights are as an employee here in this country. Just to provide a disclaimer, the information that we will be providing here today is not intended to convey is only intended to convey general information and not to provide legal advice or opinions. Participants should not in any manner rely upon or construe the information or resource materials as legal advice and should not act or fail to act based on the information without seeking the services of a competent legal professional licensed in the participant's jurisdiction. So if you are in Oklahoma, you should absolutely reach out to someone in Oklahoma. If you're in Houston and you have any legal questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But it's not necessarily that your case will be a case that CAIR can handle immediately. So with all of that said, I would like to welcome my board chair. I'm very honored to have him as my boss and very pleased to be reporting to him, but even more so honored that he is willing to give up part of his Saturday to be here and talk about your rights as an employee. He is a board certified lawyer in criminal defense. He's been working with CAIR for the last 20 years. Excuse me. And has been on the board with CAIR and been the board president and board chair of CAIR Houston for the last 4 years. So I'd like to welcome John Floyd to proceed with the presentation on your rights as an employee.
Assalamu alaikum. My dear brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to thank ISGH for hosting this important program and this clinic, and I look forward to supporting this effort in any way we can moving forward. Just so we kind of get clear, this is going to be kind of a short program. This program is intended to be a summary, kind of an introduction to your rights as an employee. If it is requested, we're prepared to come back and do a program that would probably take about 2 hours with questions and answers. And we could bring in a board certified employment lawyer as well to do that. So if the need arises, we're glad to come back and beef this presentation up. So what we're going to be talking about today generally are knowing your rights as an employee. And as we go through the program, we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, which kind of encompasses the foundation of the federal civil employee rights and anti-discrimination laws. We're going to talk about how your immigration status can also not be used as a way to discriminate against you on the job, assuming that you are, have legal status. We're going to talk about reasonable accommodations in the workplace and what the terms religious beliefs and undue hardship mean. Those are very important terms for this beginning discussion. And then what to do when you're faced with discrimination. Okay, Billy. Billy, can we hit the next slide? There we go. Thank you. So what's one of CAIR's primary missions, and we do these Know Your Rights programs in various different areas, what to do when contacted by law enforcement, or knowing your rights when you're approached by law enforcement, on the job, in the school, when you encounter bullying. There's a whole list of programs we put on, but today we're going to be focusing on knowing your legal rights as an employee. As a kind of a starting point, both federal law and Texas law make it illegal for an employer to discriminate on several what are called protected classes. Okay, so what that means is it is illegal for an employer to discriminate based on race, color, gender, religion, or national origin. Now, what's important to take note of, as you'll see in the parentheses, is that both the federal and state legislation limit a lot of these protections to companies that are employers that have at least 15 employees. And the reason for that is it's, I guess the statute when it was drawn up was trying to prevent an undue burden on smaller employers. We'll see later on that that does not apply to discrimination based on race, which applies to all employers. And all that comes from Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, what we were talking about before. Okay, Billy. So this is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is a very important component of coming out of the civil rights era in the United States, and then moving more into some of the employment protections that came out of that time period. The Title VII protects workers from employment discrimination based on what we said before: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or protected activity. And by protected activity, what we mean are constitutionally protected activities, such as free speech or freedom of association or freedom of religion, assuming that those things are done outside of the workplace and done in a way that doesn't interfere with the employment. Specifically, and what we're going to focus on today, is that an employer is strictly prohibited from discriminating against an employee based on religious beliefs. As we talked about earlier, there is a separate statute, this 42 U.S.C. 1981, which actually applies to racial discrimination, and it has no caps or no minimums when it comes to being able to seek legal redress for discrimination based on race, which is important in many cases where we don't have, if an employee is working for a smaller company, some of the broader protections that you see under the Title VII don't necessarily apply to smaller companies, but racial discrimination does. And what's interesting as we talk about this is that usually when we have employer discrimination or discrimination at the workplace, it's not just one of these factors. Typically what we will see is that you have kind of a blending of factors, because typically people who discriminate against someone because of their religion will also discriminate against them because of their race. And so that is sometimes a way that we can actually seek redress for smaller companies, is because there's almost always also attached some racial discrimination as well. Billy. So your rights as an employee. So what this means in layman's terms, right, is that you have a reasonable, as an employee, you have a right to reasonable religious accommodations, which for our purposes today would include what we call articles of faith, right? And as Billy said earlier, this applies to all religious, sincerely held religious beliefs and faiths, which includes wearing a beard, wearing a hijab, needing to take prayer breaks, attending the Juma prayers on Fridays. It can even go as far as requesting reasonable accommodation in a facility that has the space for a place where you can have prayer breaks and have a place to go and pray, if that does not create an undue hardship on the business. It also means that you have the right to be treated fairly in regards to hiring, firing, and promotion, and that religious and and racial and discrimination based on natural origin don't come into play when applying for a job, when being disciplined, when getting promotions, and when being fired. All the protections we spoke about before apply to those events, and also not having a hostile work environment. which is very important because sometimes we will see that companies don't actually, directly discriminate against employees because they know that they have these protections, but they create what appears to be a hostile work environment because of discrimination. And so that's something that you have a right to be free of. Another important thing to know is that both Title VII and state law prevent you from being retaliated against by an employer who you complain to about religious or racial or any of those other protected classes based on discrimination for any of those things. And so you have an absolute right to bring this to the attention of your employer and to ask that it be addressed. And you have a right to do that without the fear of retaliation. Okay, Billy. One of the things we get a lot, especially in being in Houston, we see this a lot. We're a very diverse community. Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of people from all over the world in this community who all work together and pray together and generally get along very well together. But we do have a lot of immigrants here. And so as first generation Americans and immigrants, it's important to understand that your immigration status should be, I guess, it should not be something that's used to discriminate against you, okay? When you apply for a job, every job has a right to ask you to show that you are legally present in the United States, you have authorization to work in the United States, and or that you are a US citizen. But once they get past that initial threshold, an employer cannot discriminate against you based on national origin or what we call the appearance of being a non-citizen. And so, once you go through the application process, you prove that you are legally here in the United States or authorized to work in the United States, and you've cleared that threshold, an employer cannot discriminate against you because of your national origin or because of your immigration status or because you may appear to be a non-citizen. Neither can an employer require that you be a US citizen. Again, as long as you are or give preference to US citizens in hiring or employment opportunities, unless they are legally required to do so. There are some jobs for security reasons that do require, for example, citizenship as a minimum before being considered for a particular job or for getting security clearances and things like that. So unless there is a specific either legal or contractual reason why citizenship is necessary, employers cannot discriminate against someone who is legally present in the United States and is authorized to work and cannot discriminate because of your immigration status. There were a line of cases that came out, and that's why we have this look like or the appearance of citizens language in the presentation. It is illegal for an employer to discriminate against people who are legally present in the United States merely because they look like they're not citizens. And we see that still sometimes even in law enforcement, where we have discrimination both in the employment area and law enforcement, and sometimes even in our schools, based on just simply the appearance of being a non-citizen. And that's particularly important for when we're talking about articles of faith, because as we know in our community, there are many people who have articles of faith that people who are uneducated or unfamiliar with our culture may think, may make them believe or make them prejudge someone as being a non-citizen. And so those are all things you need to be aware of. So how do you go about in the religious freedom arena? How do you go about requesting these protections? The way you make a request for a reasonable accommodation at the workplace is to make a professional and polite request to your employer for a reasonable accommodation. And it's important that you do it this way because the employer or the business is not responsible for knowing or understanding what your religious beliefs may be, or what other issues you may need to express your religious freedoms. And so you need to bring a request for a reasonable accommodation to your employer. And we will suggest that everything be done in writing towards the end of this, but everything really needs to be documented. So make a polite request for a reasonable accommodation, and state in that request that the request is being made due to a conflict that exists between expressing your religious beliefs, your sincerely held religious beliefs, and the conditions of your employment. For example, if we have a very large company who has enough employees to cover all their different schedules, and a Muslim brother or sister wants or needs to take Fridays off to attend Jummah, assuming that the employer can accommodate the schedule, that is a reasonable request for a reasonable accommodation. If you can switch schedules with other people and it doesn't create an undue hardship on the business, that is a reasonable accommodation, a request for reasonable accommodation, and the employer should not reject that unless it creates an undue hardship. And we'll talk about this also. So as part of this request, you can also state in there why you think that the accommodation should be granted, and why it does not pose an undue hardship on the employer. There's not a necessary requirement that the employer grants this request, but it needs, this initial request at least, but it needs to be documented. Okay, Billy. Can we get the next slide, Billy?
Yeah, sorry, my computer is frozen. Just bear with me a minute. I'm so sorry, everyone.
So we'll talk about undue hardship next. The courts have and the statute was basically developed in a way where companies do not necessarily have to grant these requests if it creates an undue hardship on the business. And what that means is that it either is cost prohibitive, it causes a stress on the other employees because they are needing to take an undue burden or an undue share of their workload, or it prevents the employee from actually being able to do their job. And so, okay, here we are. We're back up. So what is a religious belief? And so it's very important that everyone is viewing this and wanting to request a reasonable accommodation, realize what a religious belief is. And the definition is simply that that for purposes of Title VII, at least, that in an individual's own scheme of things, that it is a sincerely and meaningfully held religious belief. And the courts have kind of defined that down to mean that it's a belief that occupies a place in the life of the person holding the belief that is paralleled to that of one filled by God or another religion. But everyone should basically understand that it has to be a sincerely held belief. There was a case at one point where there was an individual who thought that they could change religions, right? Every time a new holiday came around the corner, they would request another reasonable religious accommodation under Title VII. And that case actually was litigated. And the court struck down that because they found that in that particular case, that was not a sincerely held religious belief. And so if something like this is litigated, the courts and the employer will actually try to look for factors to prove that this was not a sincerely held religious belief. So be respectful and make sure the things you are requesting are sincerely held religious beliefs. The other important term to understand is, you can go back, Billy, is undue hardship. This is what I was talking about before. So these rights are all kind of contingent on your request for reasonable accommodation not imposing an undue hardship on the employer. So the Supreme Court has said what that means is that it's more than a de minimis cost. So what that means is if it costs much of anything to deny you your reasonable accommodation, the courts have held that that is probably enough for a company to do that. What causes an undue hardship? Well, there is a list there on that final bullet point. It says an accommodation may cause an undue hardship if it is costly, as we said before, it compromises workplace safety, it decreases workplace efficiency, it infringes on the rights of other employees, or it requires other employees to do more than their share of the work. We've seen this quite a bit recently, at least at CAIR, receiving complaints of people who are Muslim brothers and sisters when they're wanting to either wear a hijab or wear a beard as part of their articles of faith. We've also seen it in the Sikh community and some of the other communities recently. We get a lot of calls from people who work, for example, in the fire department, and they want to wear a beard as part of their religious beliefs. And there's a lot of these smaller jurisdictions, before they understand how sincerely held that belief might be, they will reject that and require everyone to come to work clean shaven. And so where we have found, as we've got involved in some of these cases in the past, is that for example, in the fire department will say, well, they need to wear an oxygen mask when when there's an emergency situation, and having a beard can get in the way of that. And so a reasonable accommodation would be to request that you're allowed to wear your beard in a way that you can still safely wear your gear, which in some cases, some brothers have decided that they wanted to trim it in a way that made it where they could still safely wear all the gear, and that has been a reasonable accommodation, right? So there's things like that. If your articles of faith cause some sort of danger in the workplace, then there is a need probably for some discussion there, and maybe some accommodation that allows you to still maintain your religious beliefs and allows for safety in the workplace. Okay, Billy. There we go. So what does religious discrimination look like? We get a lot of calls from people who are really having disciplinary issues, right? They're getting cited for coming in late, or they just have generally, have some sort of, a bad attitude, or they're not performing their job appropriately, or not working well with others. And they will, mistakenly believe that is discrimination. And that is not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is discrimination that is based on someone else's prejudice because of one's religious beliefs. And so how this is often seen is discrimination that leads to treating either applicants or employees differently. For example, if an employer has applications that have Muslim names on the application. And there is a history and a pattern of just not considering those particular applicants. That's against the law. That's religious discrimination. The same thing if they're being treated differently in regards to promotions or other or discipline, or the opportunities they're having. That is and that's if it's based on religious belief, that is religious discrimination. Another thing we see is when employees are taking adverse action that's motivated by a desire or to avoid accommodating religious beliefs. For example, if an employer is refusing to hire Muslims, for example, because they think that they may request to have some time on Fridays, or that they may have a request to wear hijab. That is religious discrimination. Often denying a needed reasonable accommodation for employees sincerely held religious belief, if that accommodation will not impose an undue hardship. That can also be religious discrimination if, for example, an employer is allowing other faiths or other employees that have other religious beliefs to have their accommodations, but are not allowing, either our particular employee or our particular religious beliefs to be respected. A weird thing sometimes that we'll see is actually that employers will intentionally either limit the number of people from particular faiths, segregate them into particular areas, or classify them based on religious beliefs. Sometimes the employer, if they're not, as we say, woke these days, right? If they're not thinking about these things, they will do this thinking that people who share religious beliefs, or people who share, racial racial differences, or countries of origin, they'll just think they automatically assume that they want to be together. So, limiting the number of people from a particular faith intentionally, or segregating people, or classifying because of their religious beliefs, is religious discrimination. Of course, what is a lot of times the most glaring type of religious discrimination is straight up harassment towards employees because of their religious beliefs. This is the kind of thing that you see when you have a supervisor, for example, or coworkers who are just verbally harassing people because of their articles of faith, their religious beliefs, their country of origin, and usually everyone knows what that looks like, right? If they're saying things directly to you that are offensive because of your religious beliefs, that is harassment, and it's causing a hostile work environment. That is religious discrimination. And finally, as we mentioned before, it is unlawful for an employer to retaliate against an employee who has basically encountered discrimination and has reported it based on their religious beliefs. And it also extends to other employees, right? So if you witnessed racial discrimination against another employee and someone complains about it, and you agree to witness and go to a hearing and testify about it, it is illegal for an employer to retaliate against you, meaning deny you advancement, or to discipline you, or to otherwise use the fact that you complained of religious discrimination, or that you participated in the investigation or proceedings as a witness. All those things are a violation of the law and can get employers in trouble. So be wary of that. You shouldn't feel as if you see discrimination going on in the workplace. You should also feel comfortable understanding you're protected in this, from what we're talking about, against retaliation, if you witness this and are willing to participate in an investigation or testify at a hearing or at a lawsuit. Okay, Billy. Kind of more on the practical side. All right, what do you do when you're faced with job discrimination? The first thing, of course, we suggest is remain calm. And that seems silly, but it's crucial to not only responding professionally, but also building a record that you do remain calm. If you lose your temper and you act unprofessionally in response to a coworker or someone who's discriminating against you, that in itself could lead to a reasonable basis for determination or discipline. And so remain calm and stay professional. Depending on the situation, we suggest that if you don't feel that there is a safety issue, that you inform the offending party, whether it's a coworker or a supervisor, that you believe that their actions are discriminatory. And as the third prong in that you report the discriminatory actions to a manager or an HR person. And as we were saying earlier, it's very important to document any discrimination you face on the workplace. And that means maintaining copies of emails. If someone's texted you, if there's anything you have in writing, that's important to maintain all that. It's also important to create a record. And so if you have a coworker who is discriminating against you, it's important to write that up, to keep records of that, to give those, to make reports and give those to your employer so that you can start to build a record. When you do that, it creates a duty on the employer to do something about it, right? They need to investigate. They're going to need to take some sort of action to get to the bottom of it, and then find a way of reaching some kind of accommodation between the parties and disciplining the offending party if necessary. So maintain copies of everything and then follow up if necessary. And what that means is just if it is continuing, you need to also continue. Don't just say this is the way it is, this is the way it's going to be, because as you do that, you are acquiescing to a lot of that behavior. So follow up, document, and keep copies. And this, by documenting, we mean by saving memos, emails, keeping journals, noting other people who might be witnesses. This is very important if it gets to the point where you need to file a lawsuit or a claim with the Equal Employment and Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, because you'll need to bring in people to back you up. Because I can assure you that if you take legal action or you file a claim with EEOC, your employer is going to go into defensive mode, and they are going to, as in a course of being represented by a lawyer, they're going to deny everything and make you prove it. And the only way you can do that is if you've kept notes, you've made a list of witnesses, you've made complaints, and you've created a paper trail. So that is, I can't stress how important that is. And as a Muslim and as someone who is cognizant of the environment we live in, I also encourage everyone when we're doing this to make sure that it is done professionally and done politely. We don't have to like the action, but it's important that we do it in a respectful way so that when you get to the point where you need a remedy, it's available to you. Billy? So when faced with discrimination on the job, there's some things that you can do, some simple requests that you can make that can be they're helpful, and they're also important in the documentation process. If you're in a situation where your coworkers are discriminating against you, if they're making religious jokes, if they're talking about your articles of faith, and by articles of faith, I mean hijab, I mean beard, I mean even dress. If they're harassing you because of any of those things, and you feel like just complaining about it and writing a written complaint is not doing the job, then there is asked to be moved to another another spot where you feel safer, move to another department, move to another job site. These are things that you can ask to do if you don't feel that the company's response has ended the discrimination. It's very important to ask directly and politely, as we said before, that and to file a complaint about the discrimination, about the discriminating parties, and make a polite but firm request that the discrimination stop. What's very important is a lot of times when a company receives a complaint of discrimination, remember, they have lawyers, and so they know that the way to insulate themselves is to get employees to sign off on documents which will either settle or waive a lot of these complaints. And so when you get into a situation where you've had to make a complaint and there's been an investigation and the company is coming to you wanting you to sign documents or to resign, do not sign any documents or resign without the advice of an attorney. We see many cases where individuals who have experienced real discrimination will come to us, sometimes months or years after the event, and they have no documentation to prove it, and they have just quit, right? And so there's very little we can do at that point because there's just no evidence to back it up, and that they quit in lieu of following all these steps. And so it's very important that you not sign any documents, that you don't resign without the advice of an attorney. You need to also remember that Texas, even though we have the federal statute and there's a state statute that prevents discrimination, that Texas is an employer-friendly state. They call it a right to work state, right? So that's double speak, which means basically the companies have a right to fire you for any reason. They claim that you have a right to work and you have a right to quit at any time, but the real effect of those right to work laws is that Texas looks very favorable towards employers and protections for employers over the rights of the employees. So don't sign anything without the advice of an attorney. If you feel like that you're encountering any discrimination on the job, and you've started to do some of these things, or you have questions about it, of course, you can contact us at CAIR Houston, and we have an incident report at www.cairhouston.com that you can fill out a confidential form that will go to us and will be screened, and we'll try to help you answer some questions. As Billy was saying, that really what our mission is at CAIR is to prevent discrimination, and we are a civil rights organization. And so unfortunately, if someone's coming to us and they're having disciplinary problems, they don't feel, and they're not related to discrimination based on those different classes we talked about before, that's really outside of our mission, but we can definitely refer you to someone who would be willing to help you. So feel free to call us. Also, you can call the EEOC and file a report with them. We have their toll-free number there, which is 1-800-669-4000. You can also go to their website at www.eeoc.gov. There is also a lot of valuable resources about your rights on the EEOC's website. There's lengthy articles on that website about discrimination of all sorts, not just religious discrimination, but racial and gender and all kinds of things. So, all right, Billy. And I see there was a question about our number. We'll have that on the next slide. Or one of the next slides. Billy?
Yeah. Sorry, my computer is frozen again. I think this is the end of your presentation, John. So
yeah, so that's it. So before I sign off, what I would just really like, first of all, thank everyone for attending and being interested in your rights. We cannot do our work unless you are aware of your rights. know that you have them, know that you're educated about your rights and you know how to assert them. So it's very important to us that we have this opportunity to begin this discussion and begin the educational process. So once again, I really want to thank ISGH for putting this program together. I think it's very valuable for the community. And inshallah, if you have any questions, we're glad to answer them. And I'm going to pass it back to Billy.
Absolutely. So sorry about that, everyone. My computer doesn't normally act like this. It just likes to act like this when I'm presenting. So as John mentioned, if you experience any civil rights violation at all, please contact our office. Interestingly, while we were in the middle of this, I did just get an employment discrimination case, literally while John was talking. So I'm available to answer your questions 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and from 12 to 6, Saturday and Sunday. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out via email or shoot us a phone call. You can find CAIR Houston on all social media platforms at CAIR Houston on Twitter and Instagram as well. CAIRHouston.com for our website. And you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn at cair.tx.houston. So before we go, John, we do have a few questions pre-written here.
If you don't mind, there was a request for the phone number as well. If you can.
Yes, I'm so sorry. So the phone number is 713-838-2247. That number again, 713-838-2247. You can also find it on our website.
And also you can contact ISGH and they definitely know how to get a hold of us. So we have some questions.
Yes, we have some pre-written questions here. And Sister Amber, go ahead.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing session, gentlemen. Thank you so much. It is so important for us as employees to be informed and feel confident knowing we have rights and a voice in the workplace. Having said that, we did receive some questions through our registration form. First of all, one of the questions was, how should I deal with intimidation, vulgar conversation, and/or discrimination? I don't know if I should call CAIR or not. Is this something that I reach out to you for?
So we get a lot of calls like this, and a lot of people are concerned about bringing in CAIR or any other civil rights group because they're afraid that that might cause some problems at work. And so we're glad to talk to anyone about the issues they're facing and to give them some guidance. Whether we actually get involved and contact the employer is part of that discussion. There are many times where we just educate people about what to do and how to handle it. That are very productive conversations, and people are able to handle things confidently that way. But if you're experiencing harassment on the job, vulgar language, it is, as we said before, it's just very important, number one, to voice that concern with the supervisor, to document it, and to be persistent in that if that kind of conduct persists. No one needs to work in a hostile environment. And if this harassment or foul conduct has anything to do with any of those protected classes we talked about before, with religion, race, sexual gender, or sexual orientation, even those things are protected by law.
Okay. Another question we have is, what rights do you have when applying for a job, especially when employers ask you to waive rights indirectly or directly via the employment clauses?
So this is a kind of a stickier question because, as I said before, Texas is a right to work and a right to fire kind of state. There's not a whole lot of protections when you're applying for a job unless you're being discriminated against because of your race, your religion, national origin, gender. And so I'm not sure exactly if there are jobs, for example, where you do have to waive, for example, getting involved in politics or expressing political opinions because somehow it affects the job. And so if you go into a job knowing that you are waiving these rights, that's part of the contract. So as long as it is not something that's oppressive, the state and the courts are basically going to say that if you know that going in and you sign off on those things, that you can waive your rights. We can waive our rights to things. We do it all the time.
So we have to be careful about what we're signing.
Yeah, it's a good idea. That's why lawyers always tell you to read everything. Don't sign anything without reading it and understanding it. If you have any questions about what's in it, you need to consult an attorney so you understand what you're signing, because you can waive very important rights.
Got it. Is there a statute of limitations to file a discrimination suit?
So there are statutes of limitations, yes, in both the state and federal arena. They can be as short as 2 years, and in some unique situations, a little bit longer than that. But yes, there are statutes of limitations. That's why it's important you don't wait until it's gone on for months or years and you're frustrated and you quit. And then you think about it for another couple of years before you contact an attorney. The best thing to do is to document it, and to, if it's not being resolved, to contact an attorney while it's going on. The best time to talk to an attorney about discrimination on the workplace is while it is happening, because there are these statutes of limitation. And also a lot of times the attorney will give you strategies about how to document and build the case if it doesn't go away.
That was going to be my follow-up, because somebody has asked, what if I heard something in a meeting, but I don't have any hard evidence of discrimination? Am I out of luck because I don't have a paper trail?
It makes it much more difficult because, as I said earlier, when your employers are going to have lawyers on call, right? The employers are the ones, the lawyers are the ones that are writing up these agreements. They're the ones that are giving the company strategies about how to respond. They're setting up the HR rules. And so if you have heard something that is discriminatory or that's harassing, that's why it's so important at that point that you make note of who else was there, and that you keep notes, that you document who else was there. Because when it comes time to lodge that complaint, of course, the company their first reaction is going to be what's called a general denial, and basically the demand that you prove that, right? Because they're trying to save their bottom line, their pocketbook. And so it's very important to make notes. You can document it by, talking to other witnesses and getting all their information and their contact information and hearing what they saw. You can get statements from them if you have to, but there are other ways to do it. But yes, you really need to be able to prove it, because if it's just your word against your employer, and there's nothing else that backs that up, it becomes, a he said, she said kind of thing, and it becomes very difficult.
So like in a meeting kind of situation, it's still okay, because there might be other witnesses, like you said,
right,
may have heard what you did.
Right.
Wonderful. Another question we have is, how do we know if we are on a government watch list, and what's the process of getting out of that list, or is there one?
So shifting gears to what my main focus of interest at the chapter is, so you will know if you're on a watch list. It's not very hard. If you are traveling and having problems traveling, you're getting harassed when you enter the country, or not being allowed to get on a plane, you're on a watch list. There's a lot of different ways that, and be very honest, a lot of times, because the government will come directly to you and tell you you're on a watch list, and they're going to want to conduct an interview and do an investigation. So they're not very subtle about it. So we shouldn't be paranoid thinking that we're on a watch list, because that creates its own problems. But there are usually some pretty strong indicators that someone is on a watch list.
Okay, thank you.
In that instance, Sister Amber,
yes.
Contact CAIR, and inshallah we can investigate.
And we have a whole nother presentation on that subject. If the need arises and we're requested to present, we're glad to do it.
Inshallah, I would be interested in that.
We do have a couple of more questions. Is there any word of advice for job seekers who think that they aren't getting interviews because of their faith or their race?
So it becomes much more difficult at that point just because of the issue of proof, right? And so again, a way of trying to document that is if other people who are similarly situated, right, who share your faith or share your race or national origin, if you can build a case showing that a whole class of people is being excluded, that's what you really need to be able to do. One of the things we run into quite often, and this is not meant to be disrespectful to anyone at all, but sometimes we're just not qualified for the job, right? And if we're applying for jobs we're not qualified for, that it may not be because of discrimination that we're not getting the job. So we always have to be mindful that that is something that the employer is going to fall back on. And so we really need to be able to document that some way. There have been some very sophisticated cases. Some class actions have been against large employers where they have gone through and looked at applicants, their backgrounds. They can build up all the data and they can prove that this is going on. But it's fairly complicated to do that at the application point, but just because there's not a lot of data. If someone is sitting there and they're just rejecting people because of their name or because of their faith, you have to still be able to build up a case.
We're just going to take one more question and we will wrap it up for this afternoon. My employer refused to accommodate a once a year day off to celebrate Eid. Even with my accrued vacation time, they wanted a specific date in advance, and I couldn't do that because of moon sightings and holidays regarding that. So how do I tackle this?
So that's one of the things where I suggest that this person contact our office. We could definitely talk about it, but it is the request for the reasonable accommodation needs to be documented, and in that the accommodation, we can explain why it is not possible given the practices and the beliefs to pin down a specific time. You can request a kind of when we think it might happen in some cases, or when there's a window, but employers need to be mindful and respectful of those sorts of requests. And so assuming that it's well documented and the request is reasonable and there's other people who can fill those slots during those time periods, then that request it's very well a reasonable request for an accommodation and should be followed up on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for this very important and pertinent information. We really appreciate your time and yourself, Mr. Floyd, and Mr. White, for taking the time with us. Please do remember to follow us on social media. ISGH Job Networking is on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Please email us with any, email us and let us know what topics you'd like to hear about in the future. We appreciate you once again for attending and taking the time out of your afternoon. Have a great evening. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Salam.